probably one of my career highlights was having our work described as batshit crazy mortgage ads.
I'm Eric Fulweiler, and this is Scratch, bringing you marketing lessons from the leading brands and brains, rewriting the rulebook from scratch for the world of today. Really excited to share today's episode and today's guest with you. If you're in the UK marketing scene, definitely the UK financial services marketing scene, you probably already know Abba and the work she's doing with the Habito brand and business. If not, I feel privileged to introduce you to her. She is someone who I'm always interested to see what they're up to, and it was great to hear a little bit more about how she thinks about things. She and the Habito brand are behind some of the most provocative work out there in the UK market, in my opinion, right now. They're doing some things that you'll hear about that, really push the envelope. We talk a lot about how one of the biggest risks in modern marketing is just being ignored because what you're saying isn't interesting. They do not have that problem. I will put it that way. So it was really interesting to hear her take on how do you be provocative in the right way? How do you tie that to brand purpose? And then the real meat of the conversation that I wanted to get into with her was around how she creates a productive and effective creative process, both internally and then with the agency partners that she works with. She has this great relationship with an agency that she's used for a while. And so I wanted to dig into that and hear, how she briefs them, how she works with them, how she gets the most out of the creative process and steers that in the right direction for the brand and business. So really hope you enjoyed today's episode. I certainly did. Let me know what you think after you hear it. Cheers. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Scratch. I am really excited about this episode. I've gotten to know today's guest a little bit over the last few months, I guess. I think we started crossing paths as I was leaving the fintech and financial services world. And obviously that's something that you are getting deeper and deeper into with all the work that you're doing. But allow me to briefly introduce and then let her do her introduction proper justice about her role, her story, and what she's up to these days. Abba Newbery, Chief Marketing Officer of Habito. Abba, how you doing? Thanks so much for joining us today.
Eric, thanks so much for having me. So I'm the CMO of Habito, and if you've never heard of Habito, I'm doing quite a bad job. But we are a UK-based fintech in the world of mortgages, which is probably the most difficult part of financial services to disrupt. And we're most definitely trying to do that. So we are what in the UK is called a mortgage broker, but also a mortgage lender. So we invent mortgages for the kind of the squiggly careers and the different view that we have on the future than we maybe did 100 years ago. And we're also a home buying platform. So we'll do everything associated with buying your house, all the boring stuff like the legal work and the surveys and all of that.
Yeah, it's funny. I was, my sister also lives here in London, and I was at her place for dinner last night, and she's in the process of hopefully buying a home here in London. And she was on the chat with Habito. So funny, small world, but so far she's loved the experience. Hopefully she gets the place and that all works out. So Abba, before we get into kind of the meat of the conversation today, maybe you can just tell people the kind of 1 to 2 minute origin story of Abba Newbery, how you got to where you are, and kind of what your career progression has looked like in the world of marketing.
Wow, the brand of Abba Newbery. Yeah, so I am not a classically trained marketeer at all. I studied classics at university, couldn't get a job, so stumbled into the world of media and worked for, I guess, 15 or so years in media agencies, so investing clients' advertising budgets. Managed to create myself a little bit of a hybrid role between, I guess, traditionally what you called account planning and media planning. And then very randomly went to go and work for Rupert Murdoch at News Corp, starting by running his in-house ad agency and then becoming head of strategy there, which is really the ultimate jack of all trades job. And then, stumbled across Dan Hegarty, who's the founder of Habito. Very underwhelmed by even the prospect of entering fintech. Met Dan, he blew me away. I begged him for a job, and I'm still there 4 years later.
Amazing. So I know that we talked about focusing in on, kind of the creative process and particularly the partnership of the creative process. You've had a great relationship with Uncommon, the agency you're working with and Habito, but also have worked with in the past. And so I'm really curious to get your thoughts on that. But maybe to kind of set the scene for people who haven't heard of Habito and just to call out some of the outputs that the partnership and the process that you've created has produced. Can you talk a little bit about some of the highlights or some of the work that you're really proud of that you've done at Habito since you've been there?
Yeah, I guess if you haven't seen any of our work, do head to Habito on YouTube. It's all there. And yeah, I think probably one of my career highlights was having our work described as batshit crazy mortgage ads. And I guess that's pretty much what we do. So we have a very strong we have a very strong kind of purpose about setting people free from the hell of mortgages, and that's kind of what our creative platform does. It describes the kind of deepest, truest hell that customers have told us about what it's like to get a mortgage, and then we kind of resolve that, and we do it in a ludicrous manner. So it's not we do kill people in our ads. They are animated. The deaths are gruesome. Think Rick and Morty for mortgages. Um, but it very much resonates in customers' heads. Maybe like your sister Eric, where your head is like exploding in the process of getting a mortgage, and you just wish it could all go away. The other thing we do is also like explore human truths in the mortgage process that are a bit less obvious. So I guess one of our most successful creative platforms is sex. You can't get a mortgage unless you are over 18, so we get to explore that world a little bit. And 1 in 10 of our customers told us that they stopped having sex as a result of their previous mortgage process. Like it was so stressful. And so yeah, we've exploded that into one of our most successful creative platforms. So we've created a mortgage Kama Sutra, literally a Kama Sutra for mortgages, and we've also created a erotic novel with a guy called Rocky Flintstone. If you've ever listened to the podcast, My Dad Wrote a Porno, which was a mega hit in the UK. He is the eponymous dad of porno fame, and he wrote us an erotic novel.
It's amazing. It's such a crowded space. All these mortgage lenders talking about sex. How did you manage to carve out, your niche within that?
Very funny.
But I'm actually curious. So brand purpose gets talked about a lot. And actually, Habito is one of the examples, particularly if I'm speaking to a UK audience, that I use a lot of. Here is a brand that, from an outsider's perspective, seems and is very purpose driven. They've identified a pain point within the world of their customer and they are striving to solve it. So it's not just about the product or even the experience, it's about the bigger picture problem they're trying to solve or change that they're trying to create in the world. I'm curious to get your thoughts on brand purpose because I think it's one of those things that everybody talks about, but few people actually do well. From your perspective, either at Habito or just your general perspective on the industry, what are the things that contribute to being able to do brand purpose well?
That's such a good question, right? It's the hottest topic in, marketing at the moment, and, purposeful um, marketing. Look, I'm a huge evangelist of purposeful marketing and purposeful businesses and doing the right thing. Problem is, doing the right thing can be really, really, really boring, or telling people that you're doing the right thing can be equally boring. And I think that's the real kind of art of a marketing director or a CMO or any kind of brand manager, and working closely with your agency is how do you make what you care about something that is exciting, funny, interesting, stimulating, so other people care about it. I mean, we've got a very interesting moment right now, which is climate change being so like front and center and real. But most businesses who talk about their B Corp status or their kind of climate change activism, they do it in a way that's like very hard to to love. It's a bit like charity advertising. You feel like guilty for not choosing them, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be a passionate advocate. So I think it's a really big challenge to make purpose interesting.
Yeah. And the other element of it is often if you're doing it right, and definitely if you're doing it in a differentiated way, like Habito is, and there's other brands you could throw out there as examples, you're resonating with a lot of people, but you're probably also, maybe turning some people off, no pun intended. How do you think about that when it comes to brand purpose, and particularly having such a, let's say, pointed brand purpose and then breakthrough or differentiated way that you go to market communicating that purpose? Do you consciously think about, well, maybe this will alienate some people, or maybe this will, get some people not interested in us? Because I think that, you think of an example like Nike and what they did with Colin Kaepernick a couple of years back, which people always talk about. They definitely alienated some people. Do you think about that consciously, or, what's your thought process around both sides of the purpose and differentiation equation?
I never consciously try to get people to hate us. Um, I actually view not liking our ads a kind of litmus test of how successful they're being in terms of like impacting people. If you think most of advertising just like washes over us, we've seen it, we don't give a shit, we're not going to complain about it, we're not going to talk about it. The fact that people will complain that they don't like our ads, I'm like, yes. Because for all the people that complain, there's one complaint is 20 others who love, and the people who love are less likely to tell you they love than the people who hate are likely to tell you they hate. So yeah, like if you can get people to engage in your ads so much as they say, I really don't like your ads, that's quite good.
Do you get some complaints?
I
Some Twitter
think I
DMs and customer
think
service emails?
in 2021 we were the most complained about ad, but we've been
Wow.
overtaken by Tesco
Hmm.
this year with their Christmas ad, who have a lot of anti-vaxxers complaining about Father Christmas showing his COVID passport
Oh, wow.
to enter Heathrow Airport to give the children the presents. It was supposed to it's supposed to be funny, but anti-vaxxers are pretty vehement in their cause, right?
I haven't seen that yet.
It's a great. I
I
love it.
don't.
It's a great ad. It's set to Queen, and yeah, it's all about like not letting. We've had two bad Christmases. Let's go for it this Christmas. I think it's a
Yeah,
great
yeah,
piece of creative work.
yeah. Cool. It's interesting what you said of you don't intentionally try to get people to hate you, but in a way, maybe not defined that way, but in a way, what you're talking about is you do need to do something that is going to piss some people off in order for it to matter and in order for it to break through, which I totally agree with. In today's day and age, there's so much noise and there's so much advertising that is, it's just beige, I'd call it. Like, it's just like, it just kind of is out there and nobody pays attention to it unless they're forced to. And certainly nobody talks about it or takes the time to say they love it or that they hate it. So in a way, that's actually an interesting prompt for people to think about. I had a client at one point who used to say, in every creative pitch, I want to see one idea that makes me uncomfortable. And I always like that. And I throw that out there because I think that's a good actionable thing that people can do is you need something that stands out. And if it stands out, it's probably going to make you a little bit uncomfortable. So whether you say it explicitly or not, I think that's a good thing to work into the modern marketer's toolbook of if you're comfortable all the time, you're probably producing beige advertising, which might feel okay when it's going out, but it's not going to deliver the differentiation of the marketing results that you're looking for.
Totally. And Hello Habito, our creative platform. I remember very vividly we were in Uncommon, our creative agencies. I'm going to say meeting room, but they were as startup-y as we were basically. So when I say meeting room, it was like a sort of it was a meeting room, but there were too many of us crammed in there, and it was all a bit crazy. And they presented us this idea, and we all left. Romney, who's VP Marketing at Habito, Dan, founder, and me. We left, and we basically all just turned around to each other and went, Um, shit. I mean, I think we're gonna have to do this, but like, and it was a Friday afternoon, so we kind of went home and reflected over the weekend, and then came back to each other and went, "Yeah, I think we're gonna have to. I think we're gonna have to do this." And we were all terrified, and it was also one of the those ideas which was always going to live or die in the execution, like the craft of it. If it didn't make people laugh, and if you do look at our ads, like the first ad in the series is a guy where his mortgage basically comes and steals all his money, and it starts like ripping the wallet out of his, and all the credit cards out of his wallet. It rips a gold tooth out of his mouth, and then it rips his soul from his body. So we always say to ourselves, we've got like a matrix, which is like, is it a serious issue? Like feeling like you're being robbed blind by your mortgage? Yes, tick. Like, is it super provocative to actually go to people? Do you think you're being robbed blind by your mortgage? Answer, yes. And then we take it to ludicrous, which is clearly no one gets their soul stolen from their body by their mortgage. So it's got to get to that like level of people going, oh yeah, they're taking the piss. They're not trying to scare us. This is funny. And that's all in execution and pace and like comedic timing. And as a little startup, doing anything in animation is terrifying because you're like basically sticking out into the ether um, for the animation team to like work on it for a week, which you know is going to costing you tens of thousands and tens of thousands, and then it comes back and you're like, what if I hate it? I mean, we luckily have Andy Baker, who's part of the Adult Swim team, who is the brains behind Rick and Morty. So we're in good hands. But yeah, like every moment of making a Habito ad is consummately terrifying.
Here at Rival, we've partnered with The Test, a powerful consumer research platform, to produce our own proprietary research on challenger marketing trends, and you'll hear more about that soon. But in the meantime, each week, we're going to highlight a report from a test that adds context to each episode and the guests that we have on. So for today's conversation with Abba, we wanted to highlight a test's report on UK mortgage and moving trends. And in this report, a test has found that in 2021, home moving hit its highest rate since 2007, and the pace doesn't look likely to let up anytime soon. This trend is driven by younger demographics, with 1 in 5 18 to 40-year-olds currently planning to move home and saving up for a down payment. To find out more from this report, head on over to askatest.com. Here you can also run a free survey to access 110 million consumers in 49 markets to remove the guesswork from your business growth. So it sounds like a really good segue into talking about the creative partnership, creative process that you've built. But I want to ask you one question before we go in there, because I think it'll be really relevant to the people listening. You have in Dan as a founder CEO, and I've only met him once, but I think organizations take on the DNA of their CEO, so you can kind of tell what he's about just by seeing what Habito does. You have someone who is seemingly willing to back and support doing this type of thing. He walked to that meeting and felt the same way that you did. I think a lot of people listening, especially if they're in a bigger organization or maybe aren't in the CMO seat where they can walk into a CEO and say, hey, I want to do this, and get a yes. How should people think about trying to push the envelope a little bit, do things that are more provocative if it's not as easy for them or not as natural for them to get that buy-in from their boss or C-suite?
I mean that's such a good question. I'm incredibly lucky with Dan, as you say, Eric. That I think there's two reasons why I'm incredibly lucky with Dan. One is he's an ex-musician, so he understands the power of brand. There's no such concept as the best band, the best music. It's the best kind of package of the whole, the best live concerts, the best album cover. So if you're in that world, I think you kind of understand the role of kind of brand within that. And I guess the other thing I'm really lucky with is Dan came from Wonga. And whatever you think about Wonga as a business, and there were many, obviously, things in the last days of Wonga were not good. That was one of the pioneering brands of fintech, certainly in the UK, but also they began with brands and found themselves like very fast growing, very successfully with like a brand that literally went from naught to 100 in 9 months. And he certainly had kind of recognized um, the sort of power of like winning hearts and minds as a fintech business. That said, which is to answer your real question, we're a VC backed a business, and VCs, no disrespect, they do not like marketeers who want to spend on TV campaigns. They do not want like marketeers who want to buy, a big agency's fantastic creative campaign. They want you to hack your way to growth. So my board are as anti what I'm doing as Dan is pro. And I think what we've managed to do is because every single thing that we do is based in a customer insight. So customers tell us they think they're being robbed blind. Customers say that they're so bamboozled by jargon, their heads are going to explode. They tell us that, they feel so beaten up by the process, they feel like a human pinata. Like, we're expressing what people really think, and we're doing it very creatively and very artistically. And yeah, so when I go and present to the board, we're going to make a mortgage Kama Sutra. They're like, you've lost it again, Abba. But then when you show them the work and you tell them that 1 in 10 of our customers stopped having sex in their previous mortgage application, and you tell them it's being done by Noma Bar, one of the greatest graphic designers in the world, and you show them its artistic beauty, they kind of like can't not get behind you. So the art of the sale is is a lot of what I think we have to work on as marketeers. And I think a lot of us are guilty of sitting behind the numbers. What's the return on investment going to be? What's the cost per lead? Blah blah blah. No one's going to. You can't possibly evaluate a great creative idea on a projected cost per lead. You've got to sell the story first.
Yep. Yep. I love that. And I specifically love the idea of rooting the concept in a customer insight, because that's not debatable. It's like, hey, this is a problem that our customers have that we can relate to through the advertising that we do. So yeah, it's a topic that comes up. So I wanted to make sure that I asked you that question. All right. So let's talk about the creative process, and particularly how to build an effective, fruitful partnership with agencies or with creative partners. So I'd love to hear the story of, I know you brought Uncommon with you into Habito, but let's kind of take it from the top. How do you think about finding and working with a creative partner, if that's a creative agency or somebody externally, or potentially, I guess it could even be people within your business, but where does your head start with that process? What matters most within it?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't bring. I did work with Uncommon, who were an agency called Grey, when I was at News Corp. So I didn't kind of bring Uncommon with me into Habito. We already had a creative agency and we had a creative campaign, and I courted a lot of creative agencies around London, and I would very highly recommend doing that. Like, just as part of your job on like an annual basis, just go and see some people and get their opinion on your brand, because most people have got quite strong opinions on your brand and will, take a 20-minute coffee with you, and you never know where that inspiration is going to come from. Um, and I think I obviously come from creative agencies and kind of an agency background, so I'm inherently biased as to the talent of an agency, and I truly believe in the craft of a creative agency. So I have like a horror attack when people saying, "Oh, we're making our first TV ad, we're doing it internally," and I'm like, just because agencies are really good at their job. Um, I think you've got to find the right agency, and you're going to have to kiss a few frogs, and ultimately you need to have a team that you can trust. And yes, Eric, I'm very lucky that like the founding team at Uncommon with the team I'd worked with previously at News, and I knew that they were going to be uncompromising. I didn't expect them to be quite as brilliant as they ended up being, but I kind of like knew I was going to get something that was going to really scare me, which I think is really important. And I guess a lot of what I learned in an agency, and like you'll hear this from agencies all the time, clients can't brief, we need a better brief. And I think that if I have one skill, it's briefing the agency because I'm used to being briefed myself. And the art of a good brief is to give them enough direction, enough guardrails to not like go totally off the rails, but also give them total creative freedom. And I guess one more thing that was really helpful, and the CSO at Uncommon is the very brilliant Lucy Jameson. She asked a really amazing question of Dan when we started the process, which doesn't sound like it on reflection, but she asked him what is his favourite ad of all time. And the classic, CEO answer is, I don't watch ads. And you're like, come on, like, no one has not seen an ad in their whole life, right? So we sent him away for a weekend. And I guess like founders of startup businesses are more inherently linked, as you described, Eric, to the DNA of the brand than maybe, a classic FTSE 100 CEO who's thinking more about the numbers. Dan came back with this ad, and yes, go and Google it because it's possibly one of the most inappropriate ads ever shown on British TV. Only been shown 10 times, so kind of extraordinary that he picked it. And it's also like very zeitgeisty because it's sort of a precursor to Brexit. So it's the CEO of Blackcurrant Tango gets a letter from a French exchange student who says, tried to Blackcurrant Tango, didn't like it that much. The CEO basically goes nuts. He strips off his shirt, he marches to the White Cliffs of Dover, he declares war with France. There's Harrier jump jets. It's pretty awesome, pretty awesomely inappropriate. But it told me a lot about Dan. It said that we could get angry. We could use the anger, the emotion of anger, which is incredibly powerful in advertising and not a lever that many people have the courage to pull.
Well, have to include that in the show notes. And I've got my homework. I've got the Christmas ads I need to watch, and definitely that one as well. So getting down into kind of the nitty gritty, I'm curious, is there anything that you do differently with Uncommon as a creative partner, either in the process or how you work with them? Or, you mentioned, and I love that approach of how to brief, because, actually that I haven't thought about it as much on the creative agency side, but it comes up a lot when we're talking to clients about how to use influencers, because I think sometimes with influencers, the natural pull from the client side is to, well, tell them exactly what you want them to say about your product. And I'm like, the whole reason of why you're getting them involved is because they know the audience, they know the platform. Give them the opportunity to tell the most effective story, as long as it's within the guardrails of what needs to be said. But actually, a better way to think about it as long as it doesn't, go to the extreme of what can't be said. And much like that, with a creative agency, they're there for a reason. They're there to bring the creativity, a different perspective, new ideas. So give them as much of that playing field as possible. But what else do you do differently in working with Uncommon as a creative agency? I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about the day-to-day, week-to-week, or within a campaign development, what it looks like.
Gosh, yeah, I mean, we are very lucky with Uncommon. We have a very kind of open relationship with them. So as I described, like doing animation for a small business without a big marketing budget is terrifying. So we started from the outset of they showed me every piece of work the moment that they got it through. So from character design all the way through, I was seeing very, very rough work, almost on a nightly basis, because we were working with a team in New York, or kind of first thing in the morning, and so we were always kind of doing feedback all the time. So there was never that thing which a lot of agencies do, which is like 4 weeks of work and then you go reveal, and then you're like, oh, I hate it. Um, and I guess also what I did with that, and I can never thank Uncommon enough for letting me do this. Um, Dan still thinks I'm mad for doing it, but like in our all hands every week, I also showed all the business. So whatever I saw, the business saw, because everyone at Habito is a shareholder in the business. So like the marketing campaign is pretty fundamental to the future share price of the business. So everyone had an input, everyone had a view, and we've just kind of got into a very open source way of doing things, which I think builds trust, a huge amount of trust. Trust that we're going to give them honest feedback. Trust that we're not going to we don't micro do our feedback. It's like, oh, we will only kind of feedback anything that we feel like is truly fundamental. Um, and likewise, they then don't do that set piece with us that goes, the clients are stupid, they don't understand creative work. Keep them away from it until we go ta-da. And I think that's been the secret of our success. You should talk to Sam from Uncommon. He would be here, but they've just won the British Airways account, which as a small startup agency is keeping them super busy.
I'm sure they've got a lot to do. I mean, that's an interesting dynamic in itself. Now they've got a big client, and I'm sure Habito is still important to them, but how it goes in terms of resources and attention and stuff like that. I'm curious, this might be a tough question to answer, but do you have any advice for people if they feel like they're not getting the creativity that they want to see out of their agency? I mean, I know you mentioned at the beginning, I love the idea of just going to get coffee with different agencies just to see what's out there and see what people have to say, and that sometimes you have to kiss a lot of frogs. But if you've chosen your prince and you're kind of in with them, but you feel like you're not getting what you need, are there options for how you can shake that up or try to generate more creativity besides just, hey, maybe you need another agency?
Okay, so let me answer that question from not working at Habito, from being in an agency. If you're not loving the work that your agency is producing, the chances are your agency aren't loving it too. Um, and working in an agency, all you want to do is produce amazing work, motivating work, work that's going to drive your client's business, and sure, work that's going to win awards. So, speaking honestly, I would have always much preferred a client to come to me and going, I'm not loving it. And be honest with me, than, do the dramatic relationship breakup, call a pitch, nightmare. So I think, I would always be honest with your agency. And if they don't respond well to that, then you're definitely heading for a relationship breakup.
Yeah. It's amazing how often the answer to how do you solve this people problem is just be honest with them. Just have the open and honest conversation, especially if you got a relationship already, because that means people's intent is going to be in the right place. They're going to want to work it out. So I love that answer. So what are you working on now? Anything interesting and exciting that you can talk about? It's a bit of a smile, so I know the answer is yes. Just a question of whether you can talk about it.
I briefed our next Valentine's Day campaign yesterday. So I'm genuinely terrified about what I'm going to get back before Christmas. We did reject a campaign a year ago, which was to make a sex toy called the Habito Rabbito. So there are ideas that.
Who did you reject it, or did the board reject it? Who rejected it?
I have to say, it was like one of those moments where I was like, I literally have got no. I just don't know whether it's a good idea. And I tried to imagine being a journalist or someone opening your Habito Rabbito in your office. And I was just I don't know whether it's funny or not. So I actually called Dan's wife, Jenny, and said, pitched her the idea and said, what do you think? And she's like, are you like a teenage boy? And I'm like, okay, yeah, no, it's not. It's not a good idea. So sometimes actually going to your mum or somebody who doesn't work in your world to pitch an idea for is helpful, because we can all get caught up in it.
It is interesting though. Where do you draw the line? You need to be provocative, but not too provocative. And that's not a black and white thing. That's a gray. And oftentimes being on the inside, especially if you're in a creative role at an agency or on the client side, you might not have the best perspective on it. And I'll also tie this back to what you said about human insight to ground the idea for a campaign. I think, having those gut checks, if it is your mom, if it is your boss's wife, maybe, depending on what the idea is of the situation that you're in, like real world people that don't get excited about the marketing idea for the marketing idea. They get excited about the idea for how it represents the brand or what it means to them as a consumer/normal human being.
Exactly. And
So
we've
I think
all
that's
got
a really
that
good and
provocative friend
underutilized
who's
hack.
going to
Yeah.
tell us that shit, right?
Yeah. Do you do any testing of the creative ideas? Actually, this is a whole other conversation we get into that we don't have time, but I don't know why it just occurred to me to ask today, because I'm fascinated by how data is starting to play more of a role in the creative process. And there's obviously that tension of, it all comes back to that Henry Ford quote of, if you ask people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse instead of a car. So you need to be able to take those leaps that I think are wouldn't be supported by the testing necessarily. But I'm really curious actually to hear your response to this question. How do you use testing or data in the creative process at Habito?
Um, Good question. So we constantly research customers to get to those insights that then become the jumping off point for the creative platform. Um, we will research scripts in focus groups, broadly to kind of gauge uh, whether it's resonating with that insight about stress or money or etc. We never research storyboards or creative development in that sense. Um, and then we do a lot of post campaign testing or in flight testing once the ad is finished. So we use neuroscience to understand how campaigns are working. We use System One to understand what responses we're triggering. So System One are a research agency who have kind of 8 emotional responses that kind of create powerful memories in people. So we use that approach, deliberately use that approach because they're predisposed to love John Lewis Christmas ads. So they're like the harshest test we can get for a kind of death by mortgage ad. So we never test to prove ourselves right. We kind of test to kind of destroy what we've done and see if we can do it better. Does that answer your question? And we make all sorts of changes, like we actually we re-recorded our voiceover for Hell or Habito and turned the sound of hell down just because it was making people sit back too much, like oh, and so that they weren't getting as much memory recall of Habito as they possibly could. We dialed that down a bit, and then we saw Habito recall kind of jump up by 50%. So
Huh. It's so interesting though. I mean, it's such a tough one. Like I honestly don't even really know what my answer would be because there's so much insight that can come from the data and from the testing, but at the same time, it can lead you in the direction of doing more beige work if you just give people more of what they expect, which tends to be more of the same. But I think if I'm getting this right, let me make sure I understand it and maybe frame it up for the people listening. So the platform for the concepts comes from deep dive research, really strong human insights from your customers. The concepts, though, those are creative. Those aren't based on okay, cool. And then the first iteration of the script you test to see how that goes across, but not as much the visual component. And then you mentioned with the sound. So there is some testing that you're doing once you have an initial
once we have
piece of work.
once we have a final film,
Okay.
we'll
Okay,
test
cool.
for improvement. And I guess my little bit of kind of past experience on this is from an incredibly brilliant marketing director, a guy called Andy Fennell, who I work with at Diageo, who was marketing director of Guinness. And if you remember, quite a long time ago, gosh, I'm showing my age, 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, Guinness embarked on this campaign called "Good Things Come to Those Who Wait." I guess the most iconic ad in that series was, the surfer waiting for the wave and the white horses. Amazing ad. 98 probably. And I was sat in a meeting room for the first ad of that campaign, which was an ad called Swim Black, which was a guy who did a swimming race every single year, and his brother poured the Guinness more slowly every single year so he could always make it round the buoy to get his Guinness in time. It's the worst ad I think I've ever seen. I think Millward Brown, who are now Kantar, I think they may have actually said that in the meeting, that they're singularly the worst ad they've ever tested. Yeah, it was an ad that grew sales by 50%, spawned some of the most creative campaigns that Guinness has ever created. So a lot of what I think, going back to what we said originally, which is complaints can show you that your ad is really working. And sometimes a very polarized response to ad testing means that you're onto something. Listen to the naysayers, not always the people who say that they really like it.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I mean, I think good marketing is a blend of art and science, and really the magic or the things that go well versus the things that don't tend to come down to how you mix those two things together. And when you decide to follow one, follow your intuition about an idea or follow the data about what customers or market research is actually saying. And, there's no answer that you can kind of package up and put in a box with a bow on it of you need to do this every time. Because if you could, then there would be no value to creativity because everybody could do it. So I think it comes down to, depending on where you are on the spectrum, there's a lot of marketers that are way on the science side, and maybe they need to get a little bit more comfortable with the art side. And then there are some that are on the art side and need to get a little bit more comfortable with the science side. So I think it's about that awareness, that self-awareness, but also the organizational awareness. Some brands and some teams are more art than science, and there's so much benefit in both, especially now. You mentioned, was it Systems One? The agent? Yeah. I'm fascinated by the neuromarketing, neuroscience space because we just understand so little about how the brain works overall, but then connecting it to marketing and perception and behavior change, there's so much that's going to change, I think, over the next 10 years. And a lot of companies and a lot of technology is actually already out there. It's just not really distributed within most agencies or most brands. So we'll definitely include that in the show notes. And I would highly recommend people spend a little bit of time just researching what's out there, even if you're not going to use it right now, because there's a ton to learn. Great. Abba, anything that you wanted to touch on that we didn't talk about today? Any other thoughts or perspectives to share?
My one piece of advice, if you want to know whether you're on the art or science side as a marketing team, is count how many times your teams use the word content. Content isn't a thing. Writers write books, editors create newspapers, filmmakers create movies, TV producers create brilliant Netflix series. They're not talking about content. They're talking about stories that are going to inspire, delight, terrify, amaze, engage. Count how many times you say content, and you'll know which side you're on. If your teams are saying it every day, you're a science-based marketing team, and you've lost that idea of great storytelling. That said, equally, if no one in your team is talking metrics and how well did this engage, and then you've gone too far the other way. But content is an interesting word. It's an interesting buzzword.
Yeah, it's interesting. I use the word content all the time, and I'm not sure that, at least for me personally, that correlates to how much science I am. But what I think it does do, and something I'm going to take away from this conversation and definitely think about differently, is content is not a human, that's not about the real world impact that you're having. I'm not saying this exactly the right way, but I think you know what I mean. Content is just the package of it all. What's inside? How does it make people feel? How does it get them thinking differently about your brand? How does it get them behaving differently about your business? And so I think the more that people can focus on, whether it's through an art direction or a science direction, actually the impact that they want to have, the storytelling, the emotional response, the provocative nature of the ad. I think that we should all be trying to elevate how we think about what we do to that level.
Yeah, I love what Adele's just done with Spotify. I'm not a big Adele fan musically, but the fact that she said, no, don't let people shuffle my album. It's beautifully and perfectly created as like 2.5 hours of music that I want people to enjoy in the sequence I'm presenting it to them. The problem with data is that you're just going to keep on playing
Yeah.
the most popular song, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yep. Cool. On that note, maybe we'll stitch in some Adele music for this outro. Just
Not on
kidding.
my watch.
We definitely don't have the rights for that. Abba, thank you so much. It's always great to chat with you and hear your perspective on things. Where can people find out more about you and the great work you're doing at Habito?
Yeah, you can follow us on Instagram, Habito Mortgages. I'm on LinkedIn as Abba Newbery, or Twitter as Peckham79.
Okay. One of those is not like the other. Great. Abba, thanks so much again. Talk soon.
Thank you.
Scratch is a production of Rival. We are a marketing innovation consultancy that helps businesses develop strategies and capabilities to grow faster. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with me, email me at eric@wearerival.com or find me on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and please do leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.